All right, we'll get started. Bismillah, walhamdulillah, wa salatu wa salamu ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa ashabihi wa man tabi'ahum bi ihsanin ila yawmiddin wa ba'd. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. All right, if you were with us last time for this particular topic, you know we were talking about the options for buyer and seller when it comes to transactions. And we talked about the first four options. Tonight, we're going to start looking at the last four, total 8. So Imam Buhuti rahimahullah ta'ala begins by saying, Al-Khamisu khiyarul aib, wa huwa ma naqasa qimat al-mabi' kamaradihi wa ziyadati udwin aw sinnin aw faqdihima wa hawalin aw qara'in wa athrati markubin وزنا من له 10 وسرقته وإباقه وبوله في فراشه ونحوه فإذا علمه مشتر خير بين إمساك مع أرش أو رد وأخذ ما دفع من ثمن. Okay, so the fifth type, he opens up counting number 5, al-khamisu. The fifth type of option here is the option of defect, which is anything that diminishes the value of the sale item, such as illness, the addition or removal of a limb or tooth, strabismus, right? Baldness, the stumbling of a riding animal, or acts such as fornication by a bondservant or slave if at least 10 years of age, thievery, escape, or bedwetting, etc. If the buyer discovers such a defect, they are given the choice between retaining the item with compensation or returning the item and receiving a refund for the price they paid. Note there might be a typo, right? So if it says for the prince they paid, it's obviously for the price they paid. And if you want to make a note, the acts such as fornication by a bond servant, okay, prefer that terminology. All right, so let's look at this khiyarul aib, and this is the first section of this particular point. So the fifth type is the option of defect. This is what's known as aib. Okay? It's a defect or a shortcoming, which is anything that diminishes the value of the sale item. As he says here, ma naqasa qimat al-mabi'. According to, it diminishes the value of the sale item according to customary market standards, which is known as the urf. What is customary in the market? Is it determined to be a shortcoming or a defect or a flaw or not? And the ruling is determined based on how traders customarily perceive such defects. If they consider it to reduce the item's value, then the ruling applies. Otherwise, it does not. If it doesn't, according to the marketplace. So we're looking at the people of specialty here. This is what they do. They deal in these commodities. They deal in the market. They know how things are handled and treated. It's not left to any person, I don't know anything about this product. It's not working the way I thought or whatever, something. No, it's not up to the individual to determine whether you have an option here for a particular defect or flaw. It's based on urf, the customary standards of society within the marketplace, okay? And he points out a number of defects as examples. They include things like illness, which includes all illnesses for all living beings. And this would be very practical when it comes to animals or livestock. The addition or removal of a limb or a tooth, you understand that? Strabismus, which is when an eye deviates from its proper alignment. So instead of both of the eyes looking in their natural direction, there's one that's off, or both are off in a different direction, right? Like being cross-eyed or whatever. Baldness. Okay, this could be, it's been left general. It's also been described as due to an illness like mange, where there's some type of illness which causes hair to fall out. The stumbling of a riding animal, like if you were buying a horse, and after you purchased it, you're riding on the horse and it stumbles, it indicates there's a defect in its ability to move properly. And that's important for a horse or for a camel or for some riding animal, because you don't want it to be stumbling around and tripping. Acts such as fornication by a bondservant if at least 10 years of age, thievery, escape, or bedwetting. So he mentions here, he says, Man lahu ashrun, meaning ashru sinin. He's 10 years old, because under 10, these acts aren't considered aib, more than they're considered foolishness and an indication of weakness of a small child. Like if they were bedwetting at a young age, it's normal. But beyond that age, it indicates a bad disposition, that they're committing these types of acts. Okay, and this has to do with bondservants. Of course, we're not dealing in those things anymore, alhamdulillah. But at some point they were. And so there were things to consider when it came to these types of transactions. He says, if the buyer discovers such a defect after the sale, they're given the choice between retaining the item with compensation. All right, so you've realized that the thing that you bought, there's a defect in it. So you have one of two choices. The first is, I can keep it with the defect, but I go back and say, listen, this is a defective product. I'm going to keep it because there's some value still in it, but I need compensation for the defect. Okay? And then compensation would be due. And you would determine the amount of compensation based on the market values of what it would be at its full price versus what it would be at its price with that defect. And then that would be given to you like a reimbursement or a refund, like a partial refund. Or you can return the item and receive a full refund for the price that you paid. Okay? For the price that you paid. So let's take a look here at these scenarios with some examples to help kind of clarify the situation. Returning the item with compensation, or what we might say partial refund. So first, the agreed upon price is considered the item's full value. For the sake of argument with your transaction, like if you haggled or negotiated the price, whatever you agreed upon, it's considered that's the full value of the product, even though it may have another value at a different marketplace. Okay? And then the defect that you find causes a loss in that value. This entitles you as the buyer for compensation equal to the difference. So, let's say, for example, an item is typically valued at $15,000 when sound and without defect, and only $12,000 when defective. So $15,000 to $12,000 is a loss of 1/5 of its value. And that's what we need to understand. So we're working with percentages here. So in this case, the buyer is entitled to a refund of 1/5 the price paid. So let's talk about a car as an example. Zaid, of course, sells a car to Amr. Always Zaid and Amr. Every once in a while, we might get a Khalid in there. Zaid sells a car to Amr. After test driving it for a short time, Amr discovers that the transmission is faulty, which was not disclosed at the time of purchase. Amr takes the car to another dealer for inspection, who confirms the diagnosis. He went to a specialist. The mechanic and the sales team inform Amr that the car's market value in working condition is $15,000 and only $12,000 with the defect. There's a $3,000 reduction in value equivalent to 1/5 the price. As I mentioned before, 15 to 12. Okay, because they determined that the defect was present at the time of sale, and it caused a 1/5 reduction in value, Amr is entitled to 1/5 of the price he paid. Meaning, if he wants to keep the car in its defective state, he goes to Zayd and he says, I'm going to keep the car, however, there's a defect, which diminishes the value of the vehicle by 1/5 the price. Okay, so in this case, Zayd, he didn't buy the car from Amr for 15,000. Sorry, Zayd didn't sell the car to Amr for 15. He sold it to him for 10. It wasn't at the dealer, it was a personal sale. You know how those things work. You go to the dealer, you pay a premium, you work at Facebook Marketplace or whatever, Craigslist. Okay, then you're going to find better deals for cars. Okay, but the idea is the same. Remember, we're looking at percentages, not numbers now. So on our first one, there's a $3,000 reduction. Because he bought the car at $10,000, it doesn't mean he gets $3,000 back. That's if he bought it for how much? 15. But because he bought it for 10, how much is he entitled to? This is the math guy right here. Okay? You see how quick that was? He might be the tax guy now that we see that math happening with the transactions. Okay? You buying and selling cars on the side, or what's the deal? Okay, can't talk about it. All right, all right. So he would get $2,000 back because 1/5 of $10,000 is $2,000. So he goes to Zayd. He says, look, it's a 1/5 of the value is diminished because it's a transmission problem. I'm going to keep the car, but you owe me this compensation. So now Zayd has to fork out $2,000 in order to complete the deal in a fair manner. Everyone understand the concept? All right, so that's how it works there with keeping the item and receiving some type of compensation. It should be noted that accepting compensation is not allowed if it leads to riba, which is usury. So, for example, purchasing silver jewelry for an equivalent weight of silver coins and then demanding a price reduction. You say, oh, there's some type of flaw here in the jewelry. Okay, I need a price reduction. So instead of, because that's how it works in Islam, if you're going to be doing these currencies, silver for silver, gold for gold, that have to be the same amounts at the time of exchange. They have to be concluded right away. Okay, so you can't buy a 1 weight of silver for a lesser weight of silver. So in this case, he notes that the jewelry has some type of defect in it. He's going to go back and say, I'm going to keep it, but I want compensation because the value of it is perceived value. The value of it's the same because it's silver. Okay, madruba or not, whether it's been made into something or not, it's still the same thing. So in this case, he can't take a reduction because now he's tilted the scale and caused a ribawi transaction to occur. The option that he does have, however, is to either keep it as it is with the flaw without taking compensation, or he can return it back and get a full refund. That's how that works when it comes to those types of ribawi or usurious transactions. So the second option that Amr has is to return the vehicle for a full refund. He realizes that there's a transmission problem. It's a $2,000 fix. He doesn't want the headache. He doesn't want to have to deal with the potential issues that may arise later in the future. So he just says, I'm going to exercise my option. He goes back to Zayd and he says, look, the car has a defect. I don't want to keep it. I'm going to return it for the full price. No problem. Zayd's required at this point to take back the vehicle and give the refund. If the buyer was aware of the defect before purchasing, they knew there was a transmission problem, and then they drive off after concluding the transaction, they have no option. They knew it was there. They can't come back all of a sudden and say, actually, you know what? I don't want to deal with this defect. I want my money back. He said, you knew there was a defect. We concluded the transaction. Deal's done. no right of option. He can't return it or claim compensation. If the defect occurred after the sale, there is no option. Except in cases where the item is a measured good, like grain, and the defect occurred before the buyer took possession. Before the buyer took possession. Like we're talking about grains now. We're talking about what would you buy from a farm or from a harvest or something like that, where it's a measured good, and all that they would have to do is adjust the measure. Okay? Here, the defect occurred after the sale. There's no option of return, unless, of course, you could prove that the defect was present. So if Amr purchased the vehicle knowing there's a problem with the transmission, he has no option. If he purchased the vehicle and then sometime after the sale was concluded the transmission failed and could not be traced to an underlying problem which existed before the time of sale, there is no option. So you would need to be able to say something was wrong with the transmission. And that's why you would need to have a specialist involved. You need to have a transmission mechanic or the dealership of that particular vehicle that they can diagnose, and they can tell you to a certain degree, they can give you a certain degree of certainty, look, this transmission would not go out in this particular case, in this model at this time, unless there was a problem that led up to it, which existed this amount of time ago. That's what we can pinpoint. Because it could go, something could happen to the vehicle in your possession. That's now you're bearing the responsibility of that. All right, so the concept here is to be fair in who you are protecting. Obviously, the buyer we want to protect from having to shoulder defects of sale items that they weren't responsible for, and we want to protect the seller from defects of items that were not in his possession after the transaction. Unless there's some type of agreement like a warranty or something in place where they guarantee, and that's permissible, where you guarantee certain things and you give a certain time, then that's fine to hold to your guarantee and then require them to either replace or to compensate. The next section he says, وَإِن تَلِفَ أَوْ عَتَقَ تَعَيَّنَ عَرْشٌ وَإِن تَعَيَّبَ عِنْدَ مُشْتَرٍ أَوْ اشْتَرَى حُوزَ هِنْدٍ أو بيض نعام فكسره فوجده فاسدا فإن أمسكه فله أرشه وإن رده رد معه أرش عيبه أو كسره بخلاف نحو بيض دجاج يجده فاسدا فيرجع بكل ثمنه. Okay. It says here, if destroyed, we're talking about the sale item, or emancipated, compensation is due. If a defect occurs while in the buyer's possession, or if one purchases a coconut or ostrich egg, breaks it, and finds it spoiled, then, if retained, compensation is due. If returned, compensation for the defect or breakage is required. However, if a chicken egg is broken and found spoiled, a full refund applies. What's up, man? What's up, man? All right, so here the author is using examples more than he is just addressing concepts in this particular passage. He's addressing concepts by way of example. So let's take a look at that to kind of spell it out to see what it means. So if, here is the defective sale item, if it's altered, destroyed, or emancipated in the case of a bondservant, while in the buyer's possession, only compensation is due. In the case, this case here described, returning the item is no longer possible because either it no longer exists, it's been destroyed, or the nature of its ownership has changed. Like, if it was a bondservant that you emancipated, right? You purchased somebody in order to free them, and then you realized the amount that you paid was inflated or should be less than that due to some type of defect or aib. You're entitled to something, but you can't return it because the bondservant, once they're emancipated, there's no going back to servitude. You can't say, "Whoops, I freed you, and I realized I overpaid, so I want to recover the money that I lost due to this issue. So you got to come back into servitude and be returned." Nope. Once you free a slave, they're done. They're free. You can't take a free person and make them a servant. Okay? And we've talked about some of the exceptions, some of the norms that emancipation breaks in transactions. It supersedes all else. It will break all transactional conventions because of the nature of tahrir, raqaba, right? To free somebody. It's a lofty objective in Islam. Okay? So here, again, while they're in the buyer's possession, that which has been altered or destroyed, only compensation is due, right? Because we cannot, in the case of the bondservant, we can't return the servant back. Now they're a free person. Ownership has changed. They're no longer owned, but they're free. Or if you've gifted something away, like you bought something and then you gifted it, you bought something to gift, and then you realize, wait a minute, there's an aib there. When you gift something to somebody, the ownership transfers. It's not yours anymore. You can't go back to the person you gifted it and say, "Hey, I realized I overpaid because there's an aib here, a defect. I need to take it back from you." No, you don't get to do that. It's gifted. The person don't have to give it back to you willingly and say, "Yeah, okay, I'm giving it back to you. It's yours now. Do what you want with it." Otherwise, they might say, "No, this is a gift. I'm keeping it." Defect or not, it's a gift. I didn't pay for it, so I'm going to live with it the way it is, right? So only compensation is due here. And then if it's been altered or destroyed, or let's say altered, the buyer cannot be forced to accept it in a diminished, altered state. So, Amr finds out that there's a problem with the car's transmission, which would entitle him to compensation. And then he wrecks the car beyond repair. Whoopsie. He's destroyed the car. The buyer cannot be forced to accept it in such a diminished and altered state. So, he would only be entitled to the compensation for that aib, that defect, and he could not return the totaled car to get a refund for the whole thing. Say, "Look, there's a problem with the transmission, but then of course I wrecked the car. So Zaid, here's your car. It's wrecked, but it was a faulty vehicle, so you take it." Zaid's going to go, "Sorry, I can give you the $2,000 for the transmission, but I'm not going to take the car back. Because now there's nothing I can do. There's no value in this. Maybe the scrapyard, but that's not his business." Okay? He goes on and he says here about the defect. In that case, you might have an argument. If the aib led to the destruction, then that's another story altogether. Yeah. But you causing destroying it, whether it was intentional or unintentional, while in your possession, unrelated to that particular aib, wasn't like the brakes went out and therefore we've got damages beyond whatever. All right, so the next part, he says, if an additional defect occurs while in the buyer's possession. Now, we're not talking about destruction. There's an additional defect which occurs while in the buyer's possession. The buyer is responsible. So there's already a defect in the sales item, we realized. But now we're talking about an additional defect that the buyer is responsible for. While in the buyer's possession, there's an additional defect that happens. The buyer's responsible for that defect. Or he says if one purchases a coconut or an ostrich egg, breaks it, and finds it spoiled. Meaning in the process of investigating the product for defects, they have to damage it. Like the only way they're going to know if the ostrich egg is rotten is by opening it. The only way they're going to know that the coconut is rotten or expired, that's what I wanted, is by opening it. And once you've opened it, it's done. It's open, right? And he finds it spoiled. So this is the process of investigation which requires you to cause another defect. This is essentially a defect. Then, if retained, compensation is due. So if they say, let's say the coconut, they say, oh, it's no good. It's the coconut milk and the meat, right? It's bad. Right? Because you're going to want both. I mean, you want to drink the milk, the water, and then you want to eat the meat, or whatever you call it. What do you call it? Yeah? You just do math. Yeah, sorry. Wrong guy. You want the inside, the white part. It's like nice and soft and chewy. But now you find it's not there. Or the same thing for ostrich egg. You can go and say, look, it's no good. They can compensate you. And the reason they'll compensate you for that is because this item, there's value to what you still have. There's value to the shell. It's a usable thing, as well as the ostrich egg shell. There's value to that piece. Okay, it can be utilized for something else. You can make a container. It's an arts and crafts thing, a handicraft project. I don't mean like decorating your refrigerator. I'm talking about making something of use. Okay, a bowl or a cup or a container can be utilized, can be made out of those things, so there's value still there. And if you want to return it, compensation for the defect or breakage is required, meaning you can return it to get the value that you paid for it, but you'll have to detract or subtract the damage that you caused. Again, because those things contain value, they're going to say, look, they're going to, in the market, they're going to know, okay, if you want to buy a coconut shell, a whole one, it costs this. Some people, they buy them just for the shell. They drill a little hole, they pull all the contents out, and now they've got a shell. They're going to use that for something. Or the ostrich egg. They're going to take the top, the little piece out, drain it out. They're going to use this for something. That has a value. So they're going to say, look, this is what it is when it's all good and everything's right. And this is what it is in its diminished state, where you're just getting the shell. But the problem is, let's say the whole thing is this is a $20 coconut. I don't know what they go for. In Tanzania, it's like less than $1. It's like a quarter. And they open it for you, and you drink it, and then they scrape out the inside, and you eat that. It's like a quarter. Yeah, we were getting sick off of that because they sell them outside, like on the street, you know. Yeah, it was just amazing. Yeah. The days of fresh stuff, yeah. Yeah, it's right off the tree, you know. They would open it up, take it out, and then pop a hole, and then just, yeah, good stuff. $20, and they said, and the whole shell is $5. Let's say, for example, $20 for everything, and if you're just trying to buy a shell, and it's like full shell with no cracks, it's $5. So I'm going to go, well, I just wanted to consume the thing, and I might have used the shell, I don't know, but I don't want it like this because I've overpaid. So I go back and I say, hey, look, I opened it up, I'm giving it back to you. I want my refund. He says, sure, I can give you the $15, but you broke the shell, so you got to compensate for that, for $5 or whatever. They figure out some, that might not be exact $5, but because there's still some value to a half and half shell, they'll figure out some type of compensation that you now have to pay for that defect. So let's take a look at a modern example, because we're not buying coconuts. Amr discovers the transmission problem. And while the vehicle's in his possession, there's a window that's broken, which would cost $500 to repair. He's only entitled to compensation for the transmission, which is valued at 1/5 the price, or $2,000. If he chooses to return the vehicle for a refund, so he'd go back, he's got the broken window, he's got the transmission problem, he goes back to Zaid, he says, look, transmission problem, oh, and there's a window broken. He tries, the window's broken. He's trying, maybe Zaid will go, oh, okay, I'll spot you for the transmission and the window. He gives it a shot, It's not right, but he does it anyway, because, I got to try, harakat, What does he say? Zaid says, sorry, the window was fine. That was obvious. We saw that. The transmission, we didn't know about. The mechanic said it was an underlying problem, so I owe you $2,000. I'm not giving you 25 total. I'm giving you 2 for the transmission. You're on the hook for the 5 for the repair. If he chooses to return the vehicle because of the transmission, the aib, he can do that. He can return the vehicle for a refund, but now he has to compensate the seller for what? The window. So what does he got to do? He's got to reduce the amount that he would get back. He paid $10,000 for the car. He's going to get how much back? $500 for the window. $10,000 he's going to get back. I'm sorry, $10,000 for the car. No, he's returning the car. Returning the car. I don't want the car. I'm not worried about the transmission. You take the car on my refund. He's basically saying, I want my $10,000 back. But then Zaid goes, wait, there's a window that got broken in your possession. It's $500. So he gets $9,500. Yeah, he has to forego that $500 to the seller because of the window. Yeah, he's giving the car back he's giving the car back for a refund. Now he's got to pay for the damage that was incurred in his possession. The window broke. Okay, he can't just say, well, I don't want the car, so I don't care what happened. I kicked the door, let the carpet on fire. No, you're on the hook because now you're returning this product. It has to retain the same value. However, if a chicken egg is broken and found spoiled, a full refund applies. If the breakage ruins the item's entire value, such as breaking a chicken egg and finding it rotten, the sale is entirely invalid because there's no utility to the shell of the chicken egg. The only thing you're after is the egg itself, like the internal part of the egg. So if the buyer is refunded the full price, since it's been revealed that the contract was void from the outset due to the item having no utility. The egg has no utility if it's not good inside. You're not using the shell to make a container or a cup or something. You're not using it for those things, right? The ostrich egg is very different in its integrity, in its size and its strength, as is the shell of the they're very different in terms of what you can use them for. But the egg, the chicken egg, no, it's nothing you're going to use for that. And so in this case, you get the full refund regardless of the breakage, and the buyer is not even required to return the spoiled item to the seller because it serves no beneficial purpose. He doesn't have to come and produce the egg. He could say, look, it's broken. The seller's not even going to want it back. They're like, what are you going to do with it? Now I got to deal with it. He's not even wanting it back. You don't have to return it. All right? Everyone understand the concept here? The next section, he says, وَخِيَارُهُ مُتَرَاخٍ مَا لَمْ يُوجَدْ دَلِيلُ رِضَاهُ وَلَا يَفْتَقِرُ إِلَى حُكْمٍ وَلَا إِلَى رِضَا رَفِيقِهِ وإن اختلف عند من حدث العيب مع احتمال فقول مشتر بيمينه فإن لم يحتمل إلا قول أحدهما قبل بلا يمين. So the option of defect remains valid indefinitely so long as there is no evidence of acceptance. He says it does not require a ruling or the seller's consent. If a dispute arises over when the defect occurred and both claims are plausible, the buyer's statement, فَقَوْلُ مُشْتَرٍ بِيَمِينِ, is accepted with an oath. He has to make an oath, a yameen. If only one claim is plausible, it's accepted without an oath. So here, let's take a look. The option of defect remains valid indefinitely because the option serves to protect the buyer from a tangible loss, and it's not nullified by delay, so long as there is no evidence of acceptance. This is important here for you to understand. The option ceases if clear evidence of acceptance is found. Right? The item you bought has a defect. You can exercise your option indefinitely unless you begin to treat the item in a way that shows you're fine with the defect, like renting it out, lending it to someone, or otherwise disposing of it in a normal fashion. You just keep using it. Or knowingly using it here for non-testing purposes, despite being aware of the defect. Right? You realize there's a problem in the transmission. It's not shifting smoothly. But you just keep on driving. You just driving on. 3 months go through. You're still just kind of easing it down the road, 6 months ago, you're driving it. You've obviously accepted the vehicle with the defect, and then it gives out, and you go back and say, "Look, dude, I gave you the car. You bought the car. It had 150,000 miles on it. The typical standard test driving, maybe you did 50 miles in it. Maybe you did 100 miles in it. When did you figure out there was a defect, right? And now you've driven another 50,000 miles? It's been, there would be some investigation there that Zaid would be launching to see, wait a minute. Whoa. All right, so you cannot continue to operate with that particular item in a manner which shows you've accepted it. You have to stop. And now you have to go and handle the situation, because the moment that you want to rescind the sale, exercise your option, that item is now a trust in your possession until it's returned. You cannot be utilizing it like this. Otherwise, it means, dude, I got it, it's no problem. So if Amr purchased the vehicle, we're going back to our Zaid and Amr car. He purchased the vehicle and had it stored to be driven at a later date. Right? He says, I'm purchasing the vehicle. It's for my second home. Out in whatever. It's my summer home. Yeah. When I get out there next year, I'll use the vehicle. I just found a good deal. I'm going to have it shipped over there or whatever. Got a year goes by. Then he discovers the transmission problem after a year. He retains the right to exercise the option. If he realizes that there's a problem with the vehicle and continues to use it even after that year, he says, oh, there's a transmission problem. I'm just going to keep using it as my daily driver. He's done something which shows he's accepted the defect, so he cannot exercise the option. All right? Now, when you exercise your option, whichever one it is, because of a defect, the Imam says, it does not require a ruling from a judge or the seller's consent. You don't have to go to a judge. You may have to go to a judge, but you're not required in the Islamic legal code to go to a judge in order to exercise your option. The option can be exercised between the buyer and the seller. You go to the buyer and you say, look, there's an aib. This is the option I want to exercise. You don't need the consent of the seller. The seller doesn't have any right to say, no, you can't exercise your option. No, it is my right under the Islamic legal code that I have options if you sold me a product that's defective. And the option is either I get compensated for it and I retain the item, or I return it for full refund so long as those stipulations that I mentioned are met. Doesn't matter what the seller says, much like a divorce. The man doesn't require a judge to get divorced and doesn't require the wife's consent to divorce her. I say divorced, it's done. Okay? So it's similar because a marriage is a contract. And we're talking about contracts. This is a similar option that can be exercised in such a contract. All right? It says, if a dispute arises over when the defect occurred and both claims are plausible, the buyer's statement is accepted with an oath, provided the item has not left their possession. This is because the default assumption is that the missing value was never received. The missing value meaning in the defect was never received. Thus, the buyer swears that the defect existed at the time of purchase or that it did not arise while in their possession. In this case, they may return the item. Okay? If Zaid, for example, Zaid disputes the option. Amr's got the transmission problem. Zaid says, nope. Claims that the transmission was fine, but he has no way of ruling out the underlying problem having occurred in his possession, making both claims plausible. Zaid is unable to prove that it wasn't there. He has no real knowledge. Amr's claim can be accepted if he takes an oath. He can then return the vehicle for a full refund. If only one claim is plausible, it's accepted without an oath. So if Zaid and Amr had the car inspected before sale and everything was in working order, it's not plausible that the transmission problem occurred before the sale. I mean, unless we could prove that. But it was inspected, inspection came out, everything works, all tests are passed, all parts are working before the sale concludes. In this case, Zaid's claim is accepted. As the seller, he has proof that everything was working. So it's not plausible that it happened in his possession. It happened in Amr's possession. And in this case, Zaid's claim is accepted without an oath to substantiate it because the other claim is not plausible. So we're not equally matched here in our claims. One claim supersedes the other. The oath is required when two claims match each other and the buyer is given precedent because the asl here, the foundation is that they didn't receive that benefit because it was not in their possession, meaning a working transmission was not in their possession, which is a part of a vehicle. They received some of that benefit, but not all of it, because of the origin of its ownership was with the seller. The seller had all of that. Yep. Yes. 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 All right, is that clear? Is everybody clear on that? I think that's where we're going to wrap it up for tonight. The next time we get together, we'll be looking at number 6, السادس خيار في البيع بتخبير الثمن. And this is the option that can be exercised due to price disclosure. And this has to do with certain business transaction types or arrangements that you may set up between a buyer and a seller. Something to look forward to, inshallah. The next time we meet, we'll cover, inshallah, 6, 7, and we'll conclude with 8, wrapping up the section of khiyar fil bay', and then we'll conclude in time for Ramadan. So again, thanks for your attendance, your patience, and attentive listening. Wa sallallahu wa sallam ala nabiyina Muhammad wa akhir da'wana.